Hey guys, this is Max Steinberg. I'm a partner here at SaberSim, and I wanted to make a video talking about one of the most unique and, in my opinion, one of the most valuable features we offer in our lineup builder, and that's this smart diversity feature. So, as you probably know, if you play GVPs, having a big diversification of players and stacks and game stacks in your lineups is really important week to week when making 20, 50, or even 150 GPP lineups. And the reason this is a couple of things. One is having a wide variety of players, having a wide diversity lowers their variance. So it means that, if one player that you choose to use a lot gets injured or has an unlucky game, it doesn't kill your lineups for that week and you don't lose all of your investment. But what it also does is it raises our chances of a big score, which in a limited amount of weeks, only 17 weeks of the NFL regular season, this is something that's really important. We want to maximize our chances within a season of actually hitting big in a GVP. And, if you don't have enough diversity in your lineups, what ends up happening is you can lose a lot of weeks. And we just don't really want to take that risk. We want to lower risk as much as possible. But the downside of this is the more diverse your lineups are, at least for a normal lineup builder, the less profitable they're going to become, because obviously you have your core of players and these are the players that you think are really good and you want to use them a lot. And if you fail to use them, what ends up happening is you're using lesser players, and that's going to mean that your lineups are less profitable. And especially if you're not a top player, you're going to run the risk of actually making unprofitable lineups, which is really, really, really bad. So a lot of lineup builders try to tackle this in this way where they'll have something like min unique, which means you can set it to 2, 3, 4, something like that. And it ensures that every lineup that you build has at least 2 or 3 unique players per lineup. So there's always more than 2 or 3 unique players, and there's no overlap like that. And some have other methods. And I think the problem with these methods is what I just said, is that you just really don't want to run the risk of diversity for the sake of diversity, because that's going to end up having you probably make some pretty crappy lineups. And that's why I love our smart diversity feature, is it actually makes your lineups better. You're going to diversify your lineups, and the lineups are going to be smarter lineups because you're diversifying. And that may not make a lot of sense, and that might sound like me selling you on something, but it's actually really not. And I'll get into it a bit, but to actually explain this well, I need to explain how SaberSim actually works. So one thing that's unique about Saber is we simulate every game 10,000 times. And that's where we get all of our data. So for example, this is Alvin Kamara's player page, and we have his distribution of outcomes with fantasy points, and this comes from the simulations we do. We have his correlations to players on his team, on the opposite team, and we get all these things from simulating games. And you might think, oh, that's all we get from simulating games. But actually, even our projections are a result of these simulations. They're the average result of how the player does when the game is simulated 10,000 times. What we do is we simulate everything on a play level. So we assign a probability of everything happening on a given play. And for a particular play, that might mean his chance of getting a target, his chance of getting a rush, a catch, or scoring a touchdown. We try to literally account for everything. And we use that to simulate every play for every game. And once we've simulated a game, we do that whole process again, and we do it 10,000 times. And that's actually where we get our projections. They are the average outcomes of the results of these simulations. And that allows us to do something unique when we build our lineups. And that's actually leveraging some of the simulation data to capture some upside and capture these plays that will go off on occasion. So with our smart diversity feature, if you set the smart diversity feature to low, what that means is every time we build a lineup, we're taking into account all 10,000 simulations for every game. So that might be similar to something you might find somewhere else. However, if you set this setting to very high, let's say one from the top. What this means is that every time Saber builds a lineup for you, it takes just a random small bucket of simulations to use for the projections for this lineup. So we actually don't really use projections when we're building lineups for you. What we do is we take the average outcomes for all players in the given simulation. So let's say we set this very high. What's going to happen is we're going to take 2 simulations from the Cincinnati-Baltimore game, 2 simulations from the Seattle-Cleveland game, 2 simulations, et cetera, from all these games. And we're going to take the average outcome of those randomly chosen simulations. So, for example, let's say in Seattle-Cleveland, we choose 2 simulations where both games go to overtime, and there's a lot of passing, there's a lot of back and forth. It's one of these shootouts that we try to take advantage of when we're building the GPP lineups that we want to game stack. And so, Tyler Lockett goes off, Odell Beckham Jr. goes off, Baker Mayfield goes off, and they have just incredible games. Our lineup builder, when it builds this one lineup, is probably going to just game stack this game unless there's another game that went off even more, and it might include some players from that game. And it will basically just use these buckets of simulations to create your first lineup. Then for the second lineup, it's going to look at another random bucket of simulations. So it's going to take 2 different simulations for Cincinnati, Baltimore, 2 different simulations for Seattle, Cleveland, do this for every game. And in these 2 simulations for the Seattle, Cleveland game, it is just like a grinded out defensive game. And there's a lot of turnovers, there's a lot of sacks, the score ends up being 10-3, and none of the players have any fantasy goodness. What's going to happen then is it's probably, or almost certainly, not going to use any players from Seattle, Cleveland in the second lineup, but maybe, Miles Sanders goes off for Philly, maybe Preston Williams as well for Miami. It might use him, and it'll just take, or maybe the Atlanta-Arizona game really goes off. It uses like a Julio Jones, Matt Ryan stack, and it will make the most optimal lineup for just these random buckets of simulations that we choose. And it's going to do that for every lineup. And so what ends up happening is you end up getting a really wide diversity of lineups and players that bank on actual possible outcomes that could happen on a game-to-game basis. And you'll see this in a given week, right? You see this happen in real time as, sometimes players just have an exceptional game, and it's due to variance, people will just have really big games. And so we want to include those players in our lineups if they actually have a chance of doing that. And so I've already made a build. I won't actually go through building. I built this before I made this video. And as you can see, we have a wide variety of players in our lineup. So we have a lot of diversity, and we're actually using 107 different players, 450 lineups. And the most used player is Le'Veon Bell, and we only get him 50% of the time. So even if Le'Veon Bell does poorly, our lineups still have a good chance of doing well, and we still have a chance to hit it big. And if you look down here, what you'll see is there's a lot of different players who we just have in 1 or 2 lineups. And these are players that have come out of the smart diversity feature, essentially. These are players that in a couple of our simulations were the best players to put in this lineup, and they actually had big games. And so what this ends up doing is we're not just randomly picking players to round your lineups. We're picking players to round your lineups who actually were the optimal players to use in a lineup in a simulation of a couple games. And this is going to ensure that we're using high upside players when we're considering diversity, that we're actually, and since we're considering high upside players, we're actually making really, really smart GPP lineups. And that's just something you're just not going to get using any other lineup builder. They're going to diversify your lineup, sure, but they're not going to do it in any way that's going to make your GPP lineups more profitable. They're actually going to make them less profitable as you go on. And as I said, if you get too diverse just for the sake of diversity, you're probably going to end up making bad lineups. And so I think that's the beauty of the smart diversity feature, is when you use the actual simulations, you're kind of naturally capturing this upside that some of these players have. And some of these players are capable of going off on a given week. And that's hard to quantify unless you're actually simulating the games. And so that's just one reason, or that's like the huge reason I love this feature is I really do want that diversity. And when you're getting diversity that's actually improving your tournament lineups, that's going to be great when you're trying to hit it big in a GPP by getting a diversity and you actually want a chance to win instead of making unprofitable lineups by trying to be too diverse. So I really hope you learned something about smart diversity in this video. When I build my lineups, I do set this at some of the highest settings, almost always. And I think it's valuable. And I recommend, if you're not a user of SaberSim, to try it out. And we actually offer a 3-day free trial for new users. You can, sign up on a Friday, mess around with our lineup builder Friday and Saturday, use it on a Sunday, and you basically have used us for a free week of NFL, which is pretty cool. Something that a lot of sites also don't offer. They don't allow you to try out their stuff for free, but they're probably not as confident as what they're offering as we do, because we are really, really confident in their stuff. This is used by top pros, and there's a reason why. Using these simulations to create your lineups is just a huge, huge edge. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to tweet me at MaxJSteinberg. And again, the NFL season is really fun. I love making a lot of lineups. I hope you do too. Good luck in your tournaments this week, and look out for other videos in the future. Thanks, guys.